Personne ne savait que c'était elle, personne ne l'avait reconnue. Donc moi quand je me suis approché, voilà, c'était une personne blonde qui était assise au sol, qui reprenait conscience à ce moment-là et qui me regarde et me dit voilà, oh my god, what's happened, donc un peu agité.
In a Paris tunnel, a firefighter heard Princess Diana's dying words. What she whispered made him go silent for 27 years. When he finally spoke, the world stopped. Her last sentence was only 4 words, but it's something no one expected her to say. Royal experts are stunned. Conspiracy theorists were wrong. What did she whisper that was so shocking it was kept secret for decades?
C'est à ce moment-là, à partir du moment où on l'a allongée, que le médecin a détecté qu'elle était en arrêt cardiaque. Donc on l'a massée, l'équipe l'a massée, et au bout d'une vingtaine de secondes, elle a repris conscience. Enfin, elle a repris une circulation, elle n'a pas repris conscience, elle a repris une circulation, ce qui a permis son transfert dans l'ambulance.
On the night of August 31st, 1997, Paris lay quiet under a blanket of darkness. The River Seine reflected the soft glow of streetlights, and most of the city's residents were deep in sleep, unaware that within hours the world would wake to news that would leave millions in shock. At a fire station not far from the city centre, Xavier Gourmalone was beginning what seemed like an ordinary shift. He had been a firefighter for years, responding to countless emergencies across the French capital. This night appeared no different from any other, just another rotation in a career built on helping people in their darkest moments. Shortly after midnight, the radio in the fire station crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice cut through the quiet, reporting a serious traffic accident in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Gourmalone and his colleagues immediately sprang into action. Their training had taught them to respond without hesitation, regardless of the circumstances. Fire engines roared to life, and within moments they were racing through the empty streets of Paris, sirens piercing the stillness of the early morning hours. To the firefighters, this was simply another emergency call. Tragic, certainly, but not unusual in a city as large and busy as Paris. As they sped toward the tunnel, the streets around them were almost completely deserted. Their flashing lights bounced off the elegant stone facades of Parisian buildings, creating an eerie atmosphere. The closer they got to their destination, the more Gourmalone sensed that something about this call felt different. Even from a distance, he could see a small crowd beginning to gather near the tunnel entrance. Camera flashes punctuated the darkness, and there was an unusual energy in the air that he couldn't quite place. When the fire crew arrived at the scene, what they found was truly devastating. A black Mercedes-Benz lay crumpled against one of the tunnel's concrete pillars. The front of the vehicle was crushed beyond recognition, the once sleek luxury car now reduced to twisted metal and shattered glass. Smoke rose from the engine compartment, and the acrid smell of burnt rubber filled the tunnel. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the tunnel walls, and despite having seen many accidents throughout his career, Gourmalone immediately recognized that this crash was severe. But to understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to go back a few hours earlier. That evening, Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed had been staying at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Their relationship had become the subject of intense media fascination, and throughout the day they had been followed relentlessly by photographers hoping to capture images that would sell to newspapers and magazines around the world. The couple had spent the evening trying to find moments of privacy, but the paparazzi were persistent, waiting outside the hotel and tracking their every move. Just after midnight, Diana and Dodi decided to leave the Ritz and head to Dodi's apartment. Their plan was straightforward: slip out quietly and avoid the photographers who had been camped outside for hours. A black Mercedes-Benz was waiting for them, and behind the wheel was Henri Paul, the deputy head of security at the Ritz Hotel. To those watching, Paul appeared calm and confident as he prepared for the drive. However, investigations that would take place in the days and weeks following the crash would reveal a troubling detail. Henri Paul's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit in France, and he had also been taking prescription medications. This dangerous combination would prove fatal. As the Mercedes pulled away from the hotel, camera flashes erupted like lightning. The paparazzi, who had been waiting patiently, immediately jumped onto their motorcycles and began following the car. For these photographers, this was business as usual, another opportunity to get exclusive shots of one of the most photographed women in the world. For Diana, however, this was a familiar and frightening experience. She had lived with this kind of attention for years, ever since her marriage to Prince Charles had made her one of the most recognized faces on the planet. Henri Paul drove aggressively, determined to lose the photographers trailing behind them. The car accelerated down the Rue Cambon, tires squealing as it picked up speed. A decoy vehicle had been arranged to try to divert the paparazzi's attention, but it hadn't worked. The photographers were focused entirely on the Mercedes carrying Diana and Dodi. Inside the car, according to later reports, Diana turned to Dodi and asked him to hold her hand. Outside, the chaos was overwhelming. Motorcycle engines roared, horns blared, and camera flashes continued to light up the windows. In the front passenger seat sat Trevor Rees-Jones, Dodi's bodyguard, and the only person in the vehicle wearing a seatbelt. He would later recall that Henri Paul seemed almost to be enjoying the chase, even appearing to taunt the photographers as he maneuvered through the narrow Parisian streets. As they crossed the Place de la Concorde, witnesses reported seeing the Mercedes reach dangerously high speeds. Paul had reportedly told someone earlier that evening that in 15 minutes they would be safe, but safety was already slipping beyond reach. The city lights became streaks of gold as the car raced along the Seine. The photographers kept pace, their motorcycles weaving between lanes, determined not to lose sight of their target. The tension in the air was palpable. At exactly 12:23 in the morning, the Mercedes entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. In the next few seconds, everything changed. Witnesses described seeing the vehicle suddenly swerve, apparently clipping a white Fiat Uno before veering sharply to the left. The car slammed into the 13th pillar of the tunnel at an estimated speed of around 65 miles per hour. The sound of metal crushing and glass shattering echoed through the underpass like thunder. The aftermath was immediate and horrific. The Mercedes, which had been a symbol of luxury and safety just moments before, was now a mangled wreck. Its front end was folded in on itself, and smoke began to fill the tunnel. Passers-by who happened to be in the area rushed toward the wreckage. Some shouted for help, while others simply stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. The air filled with dust and smoke, illuminated by the headlights that somehow continued to shine through the destruction. Within moments, some of the photographers who had been chasing the car arrived at the scene. Instead of helping, several of them began taking pictures, their camera flashes creating a surreal and disturbing scene in the darkness of the tunnel. Inside the wrecked Mercedes, the situation was grim. Henri Paul was clearly dead, his body trapped behind the steering wheel. Dodi Fayed lay motionless beside him. Only two people showed any signs of life. Trevor Rees-Jones, who was bleeding but conscious, and a blonde woman in the back seat, whose breathing was shallow and irregular. When Xavier Gourmalone and his team arrived and began assessing the scene, they had no idea who any of the victims were. To them, these were simply people who needed help, individuals caught in a terrible accident who deserved every effort to save their lives. As Gourmalone approached the wreckage and saw the woman in the back seat, his only thought was about keeping her alive. He didn't know her name, he didn't recognize her face in the dim light and chaos of the tunnel. He simply knew that she was breathing, and that meant there was hope. When Xavier Gourmalone first peered into the back seat of the destroyed Mercedes, his years of training immediately took over. He had responded to countless accidents throughout his career, and each time the approach was the same: assess the situation, identify survivors, and act quickly. The tunnel was filled with noise and confusion. Police officers were trying to control the growing crowd. Paramedics were arriving with equipment, and the flashing emergency lights created an almost dreamlike quality to the scene. But Gourmalone's focus narrowed to the woman before him. She was slumped against the seat, her blonde hair matted with blood, her face pale in the harsh emergency lighting. But she was breathing. That single fact gave Gourmalone hope. He called out to his team for support and carefully reached into the vehicle to check her vital signs. Her pulse was weak, barely detectable under his fingers, but it was there. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular movements. Every breath seemed like a struggle, but she was fighting. "Stay with us," he muttered quietly, more to himself than to her. It was a plea against the weight of fate that seemed to press down on everyone in that tunnel. Around him, the rescue operation moved with practiced urgency. His colleagues were working to assess the other victims while simultaneously preparing the hydraulic cutting equipment they would need to open the crushed vehicle. The air was thick with the smell of fuel and burnt rubber, and there was an underlying tension that everyone felt but nobody spoke about. The metal of the car groaned and creaked as firefighters examined it, determining the best way to extract the survivors without causing further injury. Gore Malone positioned himself as close to the woman as possible. He spoke to her softly in French, trying to offer some comfort in the midst of chaos. Even though she appeared unconscious, he had learned over the years that hearing could be one of the last senses to fade. If there was any chance she could hear him, he wanted her to know that help had arrived and that people were fighting for her life. He carefully placed an oxygen mask over her face, adjusting it gently to ensure it was secure. The hiss of oxygen was a small sound of hope amid the cacophony of the rescue operation. A doctor who had been passing by the tunnel when the accident occurred had already stopped to help. This stroke of luck meant that medical expertise was available immediately, even before the ambulances arrived. The doctor and Gore Malone worked together, coordinating their efforts to stabilize the woman while the rest of the team prepared to cut her free from the wreckage. They attached a neck brace to protect her spine, knowing that any movement could potentially cause catastrophic damage if she had suffered spinal injuries in the crash. The hydraulic cutting tools screamed as they bit into the metal of the Mercedes. Sparks flew in bright arcs, adding to the surreal atmosphere of the scene. The work was painstakingly slow because speed had to be balanced with caution. One wrong move, one piece of falling metal could injure the woman further or even kill her. Gore Malone never left her side. His gloved hand rested gently on her shoulder, a silent message that she was not alone. Then something remarkable happened. As the team worked to free her, the woman stirred slightly. Her eyelids fluttered open for just a moment. Gore Malone leaned in closer, his attention completely focused on her face. He could see confusion in her eyes, a kind of disorientation that often follows severe trauma. Her lips moved, forming words that were barely audible above the noise of the rescue operation. He had to strain to hear her, moving his ear closer to her mouth. Her voice was soft and trembling, filled with pain and bewilderment. The words she spoke were simple, the kind of question anyone might ask when waking from unconsciousness. Into a nightmare they don't understand. "My God, what's happened?" she whispered. The phrase hung in the air between them, a moment of profound humanity in the midst of catastrophe. Gore Malone felt his breath catch. There was something about the way she said it, the genuine confusion and fear in her voice that struck him deeply. He responded immediately, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "It's all right," he told her in French. "You're going to be okay. We're here now." His words were meant to anchor her, to give her something to hold onto in what must have been a terrifying and confusing moment. He had no way of knowing if she understood French, but he hoped that the tone of his voice would convey what the words meant. He was there to help. She was not alone. People were fighting for her life. At that moment, Xavier Gore Malone still had no idea who this woman was. The paparazzi surrounding the tunnel were taking photographs and shouting, but in the chaos, no clear information had emerged about the identity of the crash victims. To Gore Malone, she was simply another human being who needed saving. Her identity, her background, her status in the world, none of that mattered. What mattered was the faint pulse under his fingers and the shallow rise and fall of her chest. The firefighters finally managed to cut away enough of the mangled door to create an opening. Working with extreme care, they began the delicate process of extracting her from the vehicle. Every movement was calculated and gentle. They lifted her carefully onto a stretcher, supporting her head and neck, making sure that her body remained as stable as possible. The paramedics immediately took over, checking her vital signs again and preparing her for transport to the hospital. But even as they worked, Gore Malone could see that her condition was precarious. Her face, though still graceful despite the blood and injuries, was growing paler. Her breathing remained shallow, and there was a fragility about her that worried him. He had seen enough trauma victims to recognize when someone was critically injured, even if the full extent of the damage was not immediately visible. Internal injuries were often the most dangerous, hidden beneath the surface while they slowly drained a person's life away. The scene in the tunnel was now a controlled storm of activity. More emergency vehicles had arrived, and the area was cordoned off. Police were trying to push back the photographers and onlookers who had gathered, some out of genuine concern and others out of morbid curiosity. The flashing lights from police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks painted the tunnel walls in alternating colors of red, blue, and white. Commands were shouted back and forth as different teams coordinated their efforts. Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard who had been sitting in the front passenger seat, was being extracted from the vehicle as well. He was conscious but severely injured, his face bearing the brunt of the impact. The fact that he had been wearing a seatbelt had likely saved his life, though he would face a long and difficult recovery. The bodies of Henry Paul and Dodie Fayed were handled with care and respect, though it was clear that nothing could be done for them. As the woman was loaded into the ambulance, Gore Malone stayed close. He walked beside the stretcher, his eyes never leaving her face. At that moment, he was no longer just a firefighter doing his job. He had become a witness to something profound, though he didn't yet understand the full significance. He had heard her speak. He had felt her pulse return after it had faltered. He had seen her eyes open, if only briefly. To him, these were signs of hope, indications that despite the severity of the crash, she might survive. The ambulance doors closed with a heavy finality, and the vehicle pulled away from the tunnel, its sirens wailing into the Parisian night. Gore Malone stood there for a moment, watching it disappear into the darkness. The adrenaline that had been coursing through his veins began to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He looked back at the wreckage, at the twisted metal and shattered glass that had nearly become a tomb. But she had been alive when she left. He had brought her back when her heart had faltered. He truly believed that she would make it. It would be hours before Xavier Gore Malone learned the truth. The woman he had comforted, whose hand he had steadied, whose final conscious words he had heard, was Princess Diana. And despite every effort made by him, his team, and the doctors who would soon fight for her life in the hospital, she would not survive to see another sunrise. The ambulance carrying Princess Diana sped through the streets of Paris with its sirens cutting through the pre-dawn silence. Inside the vehicle, a battle against time had begun. The paramedics worked with intense focus, their movements practiced and precise. Every second counted now. Diana's breathing remained shallow, her pulse weak but present. To the medical team surrounding her, she was not royalty or a global icon. She was a critically injured patient whose life hung in the balance, and they were determined to do everything in their power to save her. The lead paramedic kept his eyes fixed on the heart monitor, watching the rhythm of her heartbeat with unwavering attention. Another medic adjusted her oxygen mask and checked her vital signs repeatedly, whispering quiet words of encouragement, even though she appeared unconscious. The ambulance driver navigated the empty streets with skill, running red lights and taking corners as smoothly as possible to avoid jostling the patient. Behind them, the Pont de l'Alma tunnel was already becoming a crime scene cordoned off by police as investigators began the process of documenting every detail of the crash. Back at the tunnel, Xavier Gore Malone watched the ambulance disappear into the night. He felt a cautious optimism. After all, she had spoken. She had breathed on her own. When her heart had stopped briefly at the scene, they had brought her back. These were all positive signs. He believed, with the conviction born from years of successful rescues, that she would survive this terrible night. He had no reason to think otherwise. His team had done their job, the paramedics were now doing theirs, and soon the hospital would take over. The system had worked as it should. But inside the ambulance, Diana's condition was deteriorating. As the vehicle made its way toward the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, the monitors began to show troubling signs. Her blood pressure was dropping, and her breathing became more labored despite the oxygen being supplied. The hidden damage from the crash, the severe internal injuries that were not immediately visible, were taking their toll. Her body was slowly shutting down, and the paramedics could see it happening before their eyes. Then, without warning, the heart monitor emitted a sharp, continuous tone. Her heart had stopped. The atmosphere inside the ambulance instantly shifted from urgent to desperate. One of the doctors immediately began cardiac massage, pressing down on her chest in a steady, rhythmic motion. His colleague prepared the defibrillator, charging the device as the ambulance continued its race through Paris. "Clear," he called out, and Diana's body jolted under the electric shock. For a terrifying moment, there was only the sound of the siren and the hum of medical equipment. Then, miraculously, her heartbeat returned. The monitor showed a pulse again, weak and irregular, but present. The medical team exchanged quick glances, relief mixed with concern. They knew they had pulled her back from the edge, but they also knew how fragile she remained. The ambulance was now only minutes from the hospital, but those minutes felt like hours. Every bump in the road, every turn, carried the risk of further complications. The paramedics continued their work without pause, monitoring every vital sign, adjusting equipment, doing everything possible to keep her stable until they could reach the emergency room. When the ambulance finally pulled up to the hospital entrance, the doors flew open. A trauma team was waiting, alerted during the journey that they would be receiving a critical patient. Diana was quickly wheeled into the emergency department where surgeons, cardiologists, and other specialists stood ready. The trauma room erupted into controlled chaos as doctors and nurses moved around her, each person performing their assigned role in the desperate attempt to save her life. The medical team worked with extraordinary determination. They began blood transfusions immediately, trying to replace the blood she had lost from internal injuries. Surgeons prepared to operate, knowing that they needed to find and repair the source of the bleeding. The air in the room was thick with tension. One physician who was present later recalled that everyone in the room knew who their patient was, but in that moment, titles and fame meant nothing. She was simply a woman fighting for her life, and they were fighting alongside her. For nearly 2 hours, the medical staff at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital did everything humanly possible. They performed cardiac massage, administered medications, transfused blood, and attempted to repair a torn pulmonary vein that was causing massive internal bleeding. The injury was severe, the kind of damage that is often unsurvivable even with immediate medical intervention. At 2:45 in the morning, her heart stopped again. The team managed to revive her briefly, but her blood pressure remained dangerously low. Her body had endured too much trauma. The injuries sustained in the crash were simply too catastrophic. Despite their best efforts, despite the skill and dedication of everyone involved, Diana's heart rhythm began to slow. The doctors continued their efforts, refusing to give up, but the reality of the situation was becoming undeniable. At 4:00 in the morning, the lead surgeon looked at the clock on the wall. The room fell silent except for the steady tone of the flatline monitor. He spoke the words that no one wanted to hear, but everyone had begun to expect. Princess Diana was pronounced dead. Outside the hospital, the first light of dawn was beginning to touch the Paris skyline. The city was slowly waking up, unaware that history had just been made in the trauma ward of Pitié-Salpêtrière. Within the hospital, the staff who had fought so hard to save Diana stood in stunned silence. Some wiped away tears. Others simply stood, processing what had happened. They had given everything they had, but it had not been enough. News of her death began to spread in whispers at first, then with growing urgency. Hospital administrators made phone calls. Security was increased. The media, which had already begun gathering outside after hearing about the crash, now faced the task of reporting something almost unbelievable. Princess Diana, beloved around the world, admired by millions, was dead at the age of 36. For Xavier Gourmalone, the news came like a physical blow. He was back at the fire station, exhausted but still processing the events of the night. When someone turned on the television and the announcement was made, he felt his world tilt. The woman he had held, the one whose pulse he had felt return under his fingers, the one who had spoken to him in confusion and fear, was gone. She had not made it. All the hope he had carried with him from the tunnel evaporated in an instant. Shock rippled through the firehouse. His colleagues gathered around the television, watching in disbelief as news anchors struggled to maintain their composure while delivering the tragic news. Images of the Pont de l'Alma tunnel filled the screen, the same tunnel that Gourmalone had just left hours ago, the same wreckage, the same scene. But now it was being framed differently, not as a rescue operation, but as the site of an unimaginable tragedy. Gourmalone sat in silence, replaying every moment in his mind. He questioned every decision, every action. Could he have done something differently? Could he have worked faster? The rational part of his mind knew that he and his team had done everything correctly, that they had followed their training perfectly. But the emotional weight of loss does not respond to logic. He felt the burden of those final words settling onto his shoulders, words that only he had heard in the chaos of the tunnel. My God, what's happened? As the day progressed and the world learned of Diana's death, an outpouring of grief began that would eventually become one of the largest displays of public mourning in modern history. But for Gore Malone, the mourning was deeply personal. He had been there. He had touched her hand. He had promised her that everything would be all right. And now she's gone. What made the burden even heavier was the knowledge that he could not speak about it. French law was clear, and as both a firefighter and a member of the military emergency services, Gore Malone was bound by strict confidentiality. He was forbidden from discussing the details of that night publicly. It was not just a matter of professional ethics, but of legal obligation. So while the world speculated, theorized, and mourned, Xavier Gore Malone remained silent. The truth of those final moments, the words Diana had spoken, the humanity of her last conscious interaction, all of it stayed locked inside him. And there it would remain for the next 20 years. For nearly 3 decades, Xavier Gore Malone carried the weight of that night in silence. The images never faded. The sound of metal tearing, the smell of smoke and fuel, the feel of Diana's weak pulse beneath his fingers, all of it remained vivid in his memory. He continued his work as a firefighter, responding to emergencies, saving lives, doing the job he had trained for. But every siren, every emergency call had the potential to pull him back to that tunnel in 1997. No matter how much time passed, he could never fully escape that night. The years that followed Diana's death were difficult ones for Gore Malone. He watched as the world mourned, as millions of people lined the streets of London for her funeral, as flowers piled up outside Kensington Palace in a display of grief that seemed endless. He saw the conspiracy theories emerge, the speculation about what had really happened in that tunnel. Some claimed it was an assassination, others suggested cover-ups and secret plots. The theories grew more elaborate as time went on, fed by suspicion and the human need to make sense of senseless tragedy. Gore Malone knew the truth was far simpler and far more human than any conspiracy. He had been there. He had seen the wreckage, the speed of the impact, the devastating injuries. He knew it was a tragic accident, the result of a dangerous combination of excessive speed, alcohol, and the relentless pursuit by photographers. But he could not say any of this publicly. His duty as a firefighter and his legal obligations kept him bound to silence. So he watched the speculation continue, knowing he held answers but unable to provide them. The silence took its toll. Friends and colleagues knew that Gore Malone had been at the scene that night, but he rarely spoke about it, even in private. When asked directly, he would offer only the vaguest responses, saying it was just another rescue operation. But everyone who knew him well understood that it was much more than that. They could see the way his expression changed when Diana's name was mentioned, the way he would grow quiet during the anniversaries of her death. The burden he carried was invisible to most, but it was always there. Every year on August 31st, the world remembers Princess Diana. Documentaries aired on television, newspapers ran commemorative articles, and people around the globe paused to reflect on her life and legacy. For Gore Malone, these anniversaries were particularly difficult. He would see her face on the screen, hear her name spoken by journalists and commentators, and remember the frightened woman in the back of that Mercedes who had asked him what had happened. The contrast between the global icon being discussed on television and the vulnerable, injured person he had tried to save created a strange disconnect that haunted him. As the years passed, Gore Malone moved forward in his career. He eventually took a position leading emergency services at Brest Airport in Brittany, far from the chaos of Paris and even further from the global spotlight that had illuminated that terrible night. In many ways, the distance was welcome. It allowed him to focus on his work without the constant reminders that seemed to be everywhere in the capital. But even in Brittany, even in the relative quiet of his new life, the memories remained. When Gore Malone finally reached retirement, something changed. The legal restrictions that had bound him to silence for so long no longer applied with the same force. He was no longer an active member of the military emergency services, and the confidentiality requirements that came with that position had shifted. For the first time in decades, he had the freedom to speak if he chose to do so. And slowly, carefully, he began to consider whether he should. The decision to break his silence was not made lightly. Gore Malone was not seeking attention or fame. He had spent his entire career helping people without recognition, doing his job because it needed to be done, not because he wanted praise, but he felt a growing sense that the truth should be known, not for his sake, but for Diana's. The conspiracy theories continued to circulate, and he believed that his first-hand account might help provide some closure, some sense of what had really happened in those final moments. When Gore Malone finally gave his first interview about that night, his words carried the weight of nearly 30 years of silence. He spoke calmly and with evident emotion, describing the scene in the tunnel, the rescue efforts, and the moments he had spent with Diana. He was not dramatic or sensational in his telling. Instead, he spoke with the honesty of someone who had been there, who had lived through it, and who wanted people to understand the humanity of what had occurred. The revelation that struck people most deeply was Diana's final words. "My God, what's happened?" These words had never been part of any official report. Until Gore Malone spoke publicly, they were known only to him. The simplicity of the phrase, the confusion and fear it conveyed, resonated with people around the world. It reminded them that in that moment, Diana was not a princess or a celebrity. She was a woman, scared and hurt, trying to understand what had happened to her. Gore Malone explained in interviews how he had believed she would survive. He described the moment when her heart had stopped at the scene and how they had managed to revive her. "She was alive," he said, his voice thick with emotion that had been suppressed for decades. "I thought we had saved her." The pain of that belief, and the subsequent discovery that she had died hours later, was evident in every word he spoke. It was clear that he had been carrying not just memories but also a sense of loss, and perhaps even misplaced guilt, for all these years. His account also revealed the emotional burden that silence had imposed on him. He spoke about the difficulty of keeping such a significant experience locked away, unable to share it even with those closest to him. The secrecy had weighed on him like a shadow, following him through the years, present even in moments of joy or success. When he finally retired and felt he could speak freely, he described feeling an obligation to tell the truth, not for himself, but to honor Diana's memory and to provide clarity to a world that had been speculating for so long. "People should know what really happened," Gore Malone said in one interview. "She was calm, she was cared for, she was not alone." These words were important to him. He wanted the world to understand that Diana had not died alone in that tunnel, that there had been people fighting for her life, people who cared about saving her even before they knew who she was. There was dignity in her final moments, and there were people who showed her compassion and did everything humanly possible to help her. The world's reaction to Gore Malone's revelation was immediate and profound. News outlets across every continent picked up the story, and suddenly the crash that had occurred decades earlier was being discussed with renewed intensity. But this time, the conversation was different. Instead of wild speculation and conspiracy theories, people were hearing a straightforward, honest account from someone who had been there. The simplicity and sincerity of Gore Malone's testimony cut through years of rumor and doubt. For many people, his words brought a sense of closure that had been missing. The elaborate conspiracy theories that had suggested Diana was murdered or that her death was somehow orchestrated began to lose their power in the face of Gore Malone's simple truth. He described an accident, a rescue attempt, and a woman who died despite the best efforts of skilled professionals. There was no mystery in his account, only tragedy and the limits of what medical science could achieve in the face of catastrophic injuries. Gore Malone's decision to speak also highlighted the human cost of tragedy, not just for victims and their families, but for the first responders who witnessed these events. His story was a reminder that firefighters, paramedics, and other emergency workers carry their own burdens, their own memories of the people they tried to save. For Gore Malone, Diana was not just a famous figure from history. She was a person he had touched, spoken to, and tried desperately to help. That personal connection gave his testimony a weight that no official report could match. In the years since Gore Malone broke his silence, his account has become an important part of the historical record surrounding Diana's death. It has been cited in documentaries, books, and articles as one of the most credible and moving testimonies about what happened that night. He has given the world a gift of truth, a clear-eyed look at tragedy without embellishment or agenda. And in doing so, he has also perhaps lifted some of the burden he carried for so long, sharing it with a world that needed to hear what he had to say. The question of whether the world will ever truly know the full story of Princess Diana's final moments is complex. Official investigations concluded years ago, determining that her death was the result of an accident caused by excessive speed and an intoxicated driver. But for those who loved her and for the millions who mourned her, the emotional need for understanding goes beyond official reports. Xavier Gormalone's testimony provides something that investigations cannot: a human connection to those final moments, a reminder that even in tragedy, there is compassion, effort, and dignity.